The principal's voice, raw with an urgency that pierced the usual morning drone, blasted through the intercom. Immediate lockdown. Nearest room, lock and barricade the door. Stay low, stay quiet. My heart leaped into my throat, a sudden, cold dread gripping me. My high school wasn't like the sprawling academic complexes you see in movies, with graduating classes of 500 or even 1,000 kids. Ours was nestled deep in a more rural setting, a graduating class typically boasting fewer than 200 students. It was the kind of place where you knew everyone, if not by friendship, then by face and name. Walking the quiet hallways, I'd recognize at least 99% of my peers, especially within my own graduating class. Coming from such a sleepy town, major news stories were rare. Life here was, by and large, uneventful. Our after-school entertainment consisted of playing sports outdoors, riding bikes, and just being kids in a simpler time, a world away from the digital distractions of today, though that was some 17 years ago. Another unique aspect of our school, at least in my memory, was the near absence of bullying. Not the cliché, movie-style torment of locker shoves or stolen lunch money. Looking back, I genuinely can't recall a single kid from my graduating class who truly fit the label of bully. Sure, there were occasional teasers, but nothing serious enough to warrant intervention. And like any school, we had our share of quiet kids. But there was one student in my grade who literally never spoke. I'll call him Luke for this story. He wasn't odd-looking or overtly strange. In fact, he seemed quite nice to those who made an effort to interact with him. We shared one elective together, a computer class. Back then, our high school computer labs still housed those massive, beige box-shaped computers, their screens flickering with old operating systems. I can still picture the classroom layout. A central aisle divided 2 columns of tables, each column having 4 rows, and each row holding 4 individual workstations. The class wasn't full, perhaps 26 out of 32 seats occupied. Luke always sat in the second row in the furthest seat to the left, a solitary figure with no one beside him, while everyone else clustered with friends from their respective grades. Unfortunately, not long into the semester, the seniors in the class began to collectively target Luke. It started subtly, with hushed jokes about how quiet he was, how creepy his silence could be when the teacher asked a direct question. For reasons I still can't fathom, our teacher, a rather meek individual from what I recall, never intervened. He seemed to be a pushover, perhaps that was why. As the semester wore on, their taunts escalated. I remember one particular instance. A small, wadded-up piece of paper sailed from the back row, launched by one of the seniors, and landed squarely on the back of Luke's head. He flinched, then slowly turned around. The look on his face was etched with a profound mix of sadness, anger, and a crushing sense of defeat. The seniors continued their cruel banter, one of them mockingly declaring, "Wasn't me," and pointing at another, feigning innocence. I felt a pang of guilt, a genuine wave of sympathy for Luke, but I remained silent, a passive observer in his silent suffering. My inaction in that moment, the silent witness to Luke's quiet torment, would gnaw at me for years. It was a small-town high school where everyone knew everyone, and yet, in the face of such blatant cruelty, I chose to remain on the periphery. The memory of Luke's defeated expression, that mix of sadness and anger, never truly faded. Then, one afternoon as school was letting out, I saw Luke sitting alone on a curb not far from the high school. He was just sitting there, head bowed, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the departing buses and cars. I had an early birthday, so I had been driving for about half of my junior year. Since our town was so spread out, no one lived within walking distance of the school. It was an unwritten rule, a practical reality. So, I did the right thing, or at least what felt like the only thing to do. I pulled my car over, rolled down the window, and called out, "What's up, Luke? Need a ride home?" His face, previously drawn and shadowed, literally lit up. A small, hopeful smile touched his lips as he nodded, a silent yes. We walked to my car, and from there he guided me to his house. It was about a 10-minute drive, a short journey that felt like an eternity. During that car ride we talked. A lot. The silence that had always enveloped Luke seemed to dissipate in the confined space of my car. I found myself offering unsolicited advice, telling him to simply ignore the seniors in our computer class. "They're just a bunch of deadbeats anyway," I said, trying to infuse my voice with a dismissive air. But Luke's response surprised me. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but clear. "They're not the only ones I'm sick of." He implied that he dealt with people picking on him in multiple classes, not just ours. A wave of regret, cold and sharp, washed over me. I felt terrible, genuinely awful, for his unseen struggles. In those 10 minutes, the Luke I thought I knew, the quiet, distant kid, began to dissolve. I learned that he was a decent kid, struggling with something I couldn't fully comprehend. As I dropped him off, I commented on how close we lived, a small attempt at camaraderie. We said our goodbyes and I drove away, a new weight settling in my chest. Every day in computer class after that, we'd exchange a quick, "Hey," a silent acknowledgement of our shared ride. But admittedly, and to my lasting regret, I never truly intervened when the seniors resumed their picking on him. The memory of his quiet gratitude in the car faded, replaced by the convenience of remaining a bystander. Then one day Luke wasn't in class. Computer class was 4th period. It wasn't until 7th period English that the chilling announcement came over the loudspeaker. Lockdown. This is not a drill. The words hung in the air, a physical presence, palpable in their stark warning. Everyone in the English class exchanged nervous glances. Our teacher, usually composed and serene, looked the most nervous of all. Her face, pale and drawn, betrayed a fear that immediately infected the room. She rushed to turn off the lights, plunging us into a disorienting darkness, then frantically gestured for everyone to hurry to one corner of the room, away from the door and windows. Her obvious terror, a crack in her professional facade, only amplified our own. We huddled in that corner, a silent, tense mass of teenagers, the only sounds the frantic thumping of our own hearts and the shallow breaths we dared to take. The air grew thick with unspoken questions, with the acrid tang of fear. The minutes stretched into an eternity. 20, then perhaps 30 minutes, passed in agonizing silence before another message finally crackled through the loudspeaker. It was the principal's voice this time, calmer than the initial blast, but still laced with a grave seriousness. "There is an individual," he announced, his words echoing in the hushed classroom, wearing a mask and carrying a black duffel bag, attempting to gain entry to the school. A collective gasp, barely audible, rippled through our group. A masked person? A duffel bag? In our quiet, uneventful rural school, such a description was unthinkable, ripped straight from a nightmare. Our school, despite its small size, boasted surprisingly good security. When someone on campus spotted this masked individual, their presence immediately triggered the automatic lockdown system. All exterior doors slammed shut, locking tight, effectively turning the school into an impenetrable fortress against the unseen threat. The duffel bag, the principal implied, could only be assumed to contain guns or other weapons, chilling possibilities that sent a fresh wave of terror through us. The school day was cut short after that. Once a few police cars, their sirens muted, were on the scene, visible through the blinds, we were slowly released, escorted out class by class. I remember it was a Friday, and the weight of the day's events hung heavy in the air. I offered to drive a few friends home to my house, a desperate attempt to cling to some semblance of normalcy, to shake off the lingering dread. I'd be lying if I said I recalled every small detail of that evening, the immediate aftermath a blur of nervous chatter and forced distractions. But I think it was that same night, sometime in the deep hours, that I jolted awake. A faint, rhythmic tapping at my window. My heart leaped into my throat, a sudden, cold dread gripping me. My eyes snapped open, straining to pierce the inky blackness of the night. And then I saw it. A shadowy figure on the other side of the glass, indistinct but undeniably present. Panic, sharp and immediate, seized me. Before I could even think to scramble for my dad, a desperate need for confirmation, for understanding, overrode the raw fear. I leaned closer to the window, my breath catching in my throat. "Who is it?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. A familiar voice, hushed and almost timid, responded from outside. "It's Luke." My heart, already a frantic drum, seemed to drop a second time, plunging into a cold abyss. "Oh, here. My window?" It made no sense. A wave of disbelief warred with the terrifying reality. I stumbled to the window, my hands fumbling with the latch, lifting it just a crack, barely wide enough to speak through. "What are you doing here?" I hissed, keeping my voice low, my eyes darting towards my parents' closed bedroom door. "How did you find me?" His reply was delivered in the same quiet, almost melancholic tone. "Through the window. I tried to do something bad." And in that instant, a horrifying clarity washed over me. It wasn't the police, the principal, or any rumor that confirmed it. It was Luke's own admission. Before he could even finish his sentence, the pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. "Was it you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Who caused the lockdown?" He paused, a long, agonizing beat of silence, then answered simply, starkly, "Yes." A cold dread seeped into my bones, replacing the initial shock with a profound sense of horror. I was too scared to ask him what "something bad" truly entailed, what his horrific plan had been. Instead, I diverted, my mind scrambling for any rational explanation. "How did you find me?" I repeated, my voice still hushed, trying to maintain some semblance of control. He admitted to remembering the deli I'd mentioned living by, a casual detail exchanged during our brief car ride. He'd then spent hours biking around the area, meticulously searching, until he finally spotted my car parked in the driveway. The explanation, though logical, didn't make his presence any less disturbing. It painted a picture of a calculated, almost obsessive determination that chilled me to the core. Luke then quietly asked if he could come in, if we could talk about what he'd planned. My gut instinct screamed no. "No," I said firmly, though my voice trembled slightly. "I cannot let you in, nor can I hear what you planned on doing." The words felt inadequate, hollow in the face of his terrifying admission. Instead, acting on a sudden, desperate impulse, I suggested he go to the school and confess everything. When he refused to back away from the window, still lingering like a phantom, I did the only thing I could think of. "Dad!" I yelled, my voice loud and sharp, a desperate cry for help. The sound, amplified by the silent night, worked. Luke flinched, then turned and vanished into the darkness as quickly as he had appeared. I stumbled into my parents' room, shaking them awake, my fragmented words tumbling out in a rush of terror. My mom, her face pale with shock, immediately insisted on calling the police. She was distraught, her composure shattered by the terrifying intrusion. When a police officer eventually arrived, the familiar blue uniform a stark contrast to the quiet suburban street, I had no choice but to tell the truth. I gave Luke's identity, recounting his confession, his admission to potentially almost doing something horrible at the school. The police, already aware of the lockdown and actively investigating, immediately dispatched officers to Luke's house. But after speaking with his parents, they discovered he wasn't there. He had vanished again. I believe it was the next day when Luke was either found or perhaps he simply returned home. The police were waiting and he confessed, corroborating my account of his intentions. As far as our graduating class knew, Luke was charged with making a terroristic threat, a chilling label for a boy who had once seemed so quiet, so harmless. I know he served time and I know he's been out for a long time now. To be honest, I don't really know if he's still around, if he's ever truly found the help he needed. A part of me, a deep, empathetic part, always wanted to feel bad for Luke. I had witnessed how relentless loneliness and the sting of being picked on can erode a person's spirit, eating away at their resolve until only a hollow shell remains. He had sought me out, found my home, simply because I had shown him a fleeting act of kindness, a moment of connection that I sadly believe nobody else had offered him. That thought alone was a heavy burden, a testament to the profound isolation he must have endured. Yet, the chilling fact remained. He admitted to bringing a weapon, a gun, to school concealed in a duffel bag while wearing a mask. Even if he hadn't explicitly stated his intention to carry out the implied threat, I couldn't fully convince myself that he merely intended to scare people. My gut told me he had, for a split second, harbored a truly horrible plan, a dark intention that only faltered at the last moment, perhaps out of cold feet or a sudden, unexpected regret. I desperately hoped, then and now, that Luke eventually received the comprehensive help he so clearly needed, that he found a path towards healing and away from the darkness that had consumed him. The incident with Luke wasn't the only time fear had permeated the seemingly safe confines of my educational environment. Years earlier, in 2016, when I was in 5th grade, a wave of unsettling events swept across the country, the infamous killer clown sightings. It was all over the news, plastered across social media feeds, a bizarre and terrifying trend. Most adults dismissed it as a dumb prank, a fleeting internet fad. But for young, impressionable kids like me, it was genuinely scary. The thought of those grotesque figures lurking in the shadows, their painted smiles twisted into menacing grins, was enough to fuel nightmares. It was a normal, quiet afternoon at my elementary school, nestled in a peaceful suburban area where nothing out of the ordinary ever truly happened. The clock on the classroom wall read around 1 p.m., signaling the nearing end of the school day. We were engrossed in some mundane assignment, the classroom quiet save for the hushed whispers of a few students. Then a sudden high-pitched voice shattered the calm. One of my classmates, her voice laced with a strange mix of disbelief and fear, blurted out, "There's a clown outside." A few of us, driven by a morbid curiosity, instinctively stood up and craned our necks towards the window. And there he was, a clown, standing just a few feet away from the glass directly facing our classroom. He was a horrifying caricature, his figure clad in a baggy, dirty red and yellow clown suit. His face was a mask of stark white paint, with ominous black circles around his eyes, and stretched into a grotesque, fake grin that seemed fixed and unchanging. After a few agonizing seconds, he slowly raised a hand and began to wave, a deliberate, unnerving gesture. Some of the kids, in their youthful naivete, found it amusing, dissolving into nervous giggles. But for others, myself included, the sight was profoundly unsettling. The fear was palpable, a chilling presence in the room. Our teacher, Mrs. Riker, a woman usually unflappable, walked to the window, her expression hardening as she took in the disturbing sight. She leaned close to the glass and her voice, surprisingly loud and annoyed, called out, "Excuse me, classes are in session. You need to get out of here." The clown, however, remained utterly unresponsive to Mrs. Riker's stern command. He simply stood there, his painted smile fixed, his hand continuing its slow, deliberate wave. His unyielding presence, his silent defiance, only amplified the unsettling atmosphere in the classroom. Mrs. Riker, her jaw tight, turned back to us and instructed us to sit down, her voice now a little strained. She then picked up the corded classroom phone, its receiver cool against her ear, and walked into the hallway, speaking quietly into the mouthpiece. The classroom phones were always positioned near the door, allowing for a semblance of privacy. A few moments later she returned, hung up the phone, and walked purposefully back to the window. The clown was still there, a grotesque, silent sentinel, performing the same eerie waving motion, his painted face still stretched into that unsettling smile, radiating a chillingly generic clownishness. With a decisive click, Mrs. Riker pulled down all the blinds, plunging our classroom into a sudden, welcome dimness, shielding us from the malevolent gaze outside. Less than 2 minutes later, the principal's voice, now infused with a clear sense of urgency, crackled over the loudspeaker. "Staff, please get your classrooms into lockdown formation." The carefully chosen words, designed to alert teachers without triggering full-blown panic among the younger students, only heightened the tension. This wasn't a drill. The weight of that realization settled heavily in the room. Mrs. Riker, her earlier composure completely gone, rushed to turn off the lights, plunging us into near darkness. "Everyone under your desks. Now," she commanded, her voice sharp with a fear that reflected our own. She then pulled the door shut with a decisive click, locking it tight. We scrambled, a tangle of small bodies, seeking the flimsy protection of our desks. The room fell silent, save for a few nervous giggles from some kids who hadn't fully grasped the gravity of the situation, and the soft, muffled sobs of others who clearly understood. I was definitely among the scared ones, my heart hammering against my ribs, my imagination conjuring up terrifying scenarios. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, the minutes dragging by in agonizing slowness. In reality, it was about 30 minutes. No one spoke, no one dared to move. Finally, the principal's voice returned to the loudspeaker, announcing that the lockdown was over, and the situation had been handled. Apparently, school security had confirmed that the clown was gone. No other details were provided, just the terse assurance that the threat had dissipated. Classes resumed as normal for the rest of the day, but the atmosphere felt strangely surreal, a thin veneer of normalcy stretched over a core of unease. Everyone whispered about it during dismissal, but the teachers remained tight-lipped, offering no further information. After school, I walked home with my friend Chris, our usual route through the quiet suburban streets. We lived in the same neighborhood just a few blocks away. As we rounded the corner, a couple of fifth-grade girls from our school suddenly ran past us, their faces contorted with panic. "There's someone in the woods," one of them shrieked, her voice high-pitched and terrified. Chris and I stopped dead in our tracks, turning to look behind the school. There was a small patch of woods there, not a deep forest, just enough trees to separate the school grounds from the street beyond. And standing barely out of view, near the very edge of the treeline, was the clown again. The same dirty, baggy red and yellow suit, the same chillingly painted face with its black-ringed eyes and wide, fake grin. He was half hidden by the foliage, a grotesque sentinel partially obscured by nature, but he was undeniably there. And he was waving. Not randomly but slowly, deliberately, directly at the two terrified girls who had just run past us. It was as if he was trying to beckon them, to lure them closer. Chris and I didn't exchange a word. We didn't need to. The shared terror propelled us into a frantic run, our feet pounding the pavement, the image of that waving clown seared into my mind. I don't know what happened after that, what became of the girls or the clown, but I rushed home and immediately told my parents everything. They called the school, and later I heard through the grapevine that the police were called again, patrolling the area for hours, but they never found anyone. To this day, the identity of that person remains a mystery. I don't know if he was merely trying to scare kids, a twisted prankster reveling in the chaos he created, or if he harbored something far more sinister, a truly horrifying plan that was only thwarted by the swift lockdown. But what freaks me out the most, what truly haunts my thoughts, is the chilling fact that he came back after the lockdown. He waited, hidden in the trees, watching as kids, innocent and unsuspecting, walked home, completely unaware of the masked figure lurking just beyond their sight. The thought of that predatory patience, that calculated return, is far more terrifying than the initial scare. This next event happened not long ago, a period of my life profoundly shaped by a terrible loss. I live on the outskirts of Philadelphia with my son and my stepdaughter. I say stepdaughter because legally I took her in around 2016. My best friend, her mother, Joanne, was brutally murdered by her husband. The case made national headlines. He was eventually convicted of 5 additional murder cases and is now serving 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. I'm a middle school teacher at my son's school. He's a year below the grade I teach, and my stepdaughter is a year above, so their classrooms aren't far from mine, giving me a sense of proximity and reassurance. This specific incident took place on March 30, 2020, at the very beginning of the national lockdowns. It was a warm, muggy Monday afternoon in March. I was teaching math to my 6th graders, the familiar hum of the classroom a comforting constant. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a notification from the school's emergency system. It stated that someone was here to pick up my stepdaughter. My main emergency contact number is linked to this system, so any pickup attempt triggers an immediate alert. But this was deeply alarming. My stepdaughter was 3 classrooms down from me, she had no appointments, and no close family lived within a reasonable radius to pick her up unexpectedly. Alarm bells immediately started clanging in my head. I replied to the notification, stating firmly that I was at school, and no one within a 10-mile radius was authorized to pick her up. A few tense minutes passed on the phone, filled with unsettling silence on the other end. Then, the lady from the front office, her voice now strained, informed me that the person attempting the pickup was identified as my stepdaughter's biological father. The school, thankfully, didn't have that kind of information on file, a fact that both frustrated and somewhat relieved me. My gut screamed that something was terribly wrong. I immediately called my stepdaughter's classroom, my voice urgent, asking for her to be sent to my room. Just as I hung up, and before I could even resume teaching, the piercing lockdown siren blared through the school, echoing with an unnerving finality. Without hesitation, I barked orders at my students. They instinctively sprang into action, pushing desks against the door, barricading the windows, and then huddling together in the designated safety corner. I had a chilling certainty about who this lockdown was for. We remained in lockdown for a grueling 46 minutes. At that point, my main concern wasn't the initial threat, but how he had managed to get out. Approximately 2 hours later, the lockdown was finally lifted, and I was immediately escorted out by the police. They questioned me further, specifically asking how I knew this man, citing CPS records. I explained the entire heartbreaking story, how I had taken in my best friend's daughter after her mother's tragic murder, and the subsequent conviction of her biological father. The police then informed me of the truly horrifying sequence of events that had led him to our school. Apparently, a prison bus transporting inmates to another correctional facility had been involved in a devastating accident. A car had swerved into the bus, causing a violent crash that left 10 prisoners dead, 2 prison guards knocked unconscious, and 20 inmates, including my stepdaughter's father, escaping. Police had already been dispatched to my house, anticipating his arrival, but when they heard the lockdown siren at the school, they knew instantly that one of the escaped prisoners was targeting us. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. If they hadn't gotten there in time, if I hadn't brought my stepdaughter into my classroom, I honestly have no idea what would have happened. This happened during my freshman year of high school, and even now, at 21, I still think about it constantly. I attended a public school in a pretty average suburban town. Lockdown drills were a regular occurrence, perhaps once every couple of months, so when this one began, my initial thought was that it was just another routine drill. It was a Wednesday, 4th period, Earth Science. We had just finished a pop quiz, and I was putting my things into my backpack when the loudspeaker crackled to life. "This is a lockdown. Lock all doors. Lights off. Stay quiet." At first, nobody panicked. Our teacher, Mrs. Chen, sighed, got up, and locked the door as usual. She turned off the lights and told us all to get into the corner of the room, away from the door and windows. Everyone was laughing a little, whispering, treating it like a minor inconvenience. But then a second announcement came over the loudspeaker. The same voice, but different now, rushed, strained, infused with a chilling urgency. "This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." That's when the laughter died. The room went silent, a sudden, suffocating quiet. Mrs. Chin didn't say a word. She just motioned frantically for everyone to stay down, to keep quiet. I could tell even she was genuinely nervous now. Her hand kept straying to her phone, her eyes darting towards the door. And then, faintly, distantly, we heard it, the wail of police sirens slowly growing louder outside.